British race theory played a large role in their recruitment of Indian soldiers. The primary ethno-religious groups they recruited from were Rajputs, Brahmins, Sikhs, Muslim Punjabis, and Gurkhas. The prelude to this occurred when Britain began its involvement in the Indian Ocean trade. This led to the creation of the British East India Company, with its base in Calcutta, Bengal. The initial small garrisons of soldiers were primarily tasked with guarding trading posts. However, after the fall of Madras to the French in 1746 during the Carnatic Wars, Major Stringer Lawrence was put in charge and reorganized the company armies to 18,000 men by 1763. This recruitment increase marks the beginning of a century-and-a-half-long development of one of the largest armies of its time. The beginning of recruiting Indians en masse brought challenges. These were met with regional recruitment preferences. The regions notoriously famous for their participation in the British Indian Army were often in the hinterlands. These were subdued after intense fighting. For example, the Anglo-Sikh Wars, of which there were two, lasting from 1845 to 1849. The British viewed the formidable nature of their conquered enemies as an opportunity for exploitation. When the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 happened, many Sikhs fought with the British to put down the uprising. This loyalty was duly noted and remembered by the British in the decades to come. The Sepoy Mutiny began the end of single ethnicity regiments. The integration of castes and religions into single regiments allowed for less social group cohesion and rebellion. This brought an end to the domination of Brahmin and Kshatriya castes over the Bengal army. This also included Rajput regiments, because Rajputs are members of the Kshatriya class. This era was the most highly active for recruitment from these key regions. By 1914, 75% of the Indian Army was from these key regions of Punjab, Nepal, or the border with Afghanistan. Clans or families were classified by martial prowess on top of broader ethno-religious classifications. Surnames were used to designate recruitable populations. Muslim soldiers from border regions often had intense martial heritage. The Pathans from Pakistan and the Kashmiri Dogra. In World War I, 11 Indian soldiers were given the highest medal, the Victoria Cross. All 11 were from these key regions. In World War II, 28 received the Victoria Cross. Barring a few, all were from these key regions. The Army in 1914 clearly shows the stratification of religions. 40% of the total Army was Muslim. 30% were Hindu, 19% were Sikh, and 10% were Gurkhas. The appearance of these groups in the infantry starkly contrasts those previous numbers, with 34% Sikh and 15% Gurkhas. 89% of the transportation corps of the army was Muslim, showing how the religious groups dictated military services. In his book, Ethnic Aspects of the Indian Army in World War I, DeWitt Ellenwood says, in its recruitment policy, the Army had precise ideas as to which groups and which areas would supply good soldiers. A different way of viewing ethnic aspects of the Indian Army during this time is to consider some of the attitudinal variations between groups. This is possible within limits through an analysis of the excerpts from letters presented in the censor's reports. Given the pre-war history of the Army, it is not surprising that the attitudes of the martial classes towards the soldier's job and the war generally were positive. This applied especially to Sikhs, Jats, Rajputs, Gurkhas, and Dogras. In a speech done by Jasdeep Singh for the British National Army Museum, he outlines how Punjabis and Sikhs were coveted by the British for their stature of 5'10" on average and their chest measurements of 34 to 36 inches. The almost animalistic view of these men by the British is highlighted by Singh. They aren't even referred to as men, only the words fighting material and recruit are used. He also outlines how history influences the willingness of Sikhs to fight on the side of the British. The ninth Guru, Tegh Bahadur, was executed by the Mughals in Delhi and foretold the fall of the Mughal Empire. In 1916, the Inspector of Police Ishir Singh wrote, "British rule was foretold by our true leader, Guru Tegh Bahadur. It was established in India for the protection and help of the Sikh." Social Darwinism was rampant in 19th century Britain. The new discoveries of Sanskrit ties to European languages were the catalyst for the martial race theory. The idea of an Aryan invasion was used to construct racial ideas about Indians and their relationships to each other and to the British. These key regions that recruitment was occurring in were all in northern India, where the supposed relationship carries the most weight. This shows the prevalence of this theory in supporting recruiting decisions. The identifiers of stronger stature for Punjabis and people of higher caste in northern India was tied to racism and their ancestry supposedly being closer to the Aryans. British recruitment in India has been markedly distinct in its choice of ethno-religious groups. The use of these martial groups has been driven by the idea that certain people groups have higher physical quality than others. The perception of northern Indians, specifically Punjabis, as taller and broader than Dravidian Indians is a clear example of the reasoning behind the exclusion of these people groups. These practices carry through today, where Indian representation in the army is much higher in Punjabi Sikhs and other northern Indians from the Kshatriya caste. The British used social Darwinism and their own experiences fighting these groups to decide who would make up the backbone of their Indian army. Some of the modern examples of these regiments are the Sikh regiments. The Sikh regiment is the highest decorated regiment in the Indian Army, as well as in the Commonwealth Army. There are 19 battalions in the Sikh Regiment of India. In 1947, Sikhs made up 50% of Army Officer Corps and 33% of combat soldiers, despite being 1.7% of the total population. This ended in around 1965, when the total number of Sikhs reduced due to independence movements in Punjab, notably the Khalistan and Zindabad movement. Since 1947, India has had 6 Gurkha regiments of Nepalese origin. The British Brigade of Gurkhas was based in Hong Kong before 1997. It includes the Royal Gurkha Rifles, which are an elite group revered by the world. The elite Muslim regiments were dissolved after partition. Many went to Pakistan, where the Frontier Force Regiment traces its roots back to the British Punjab Irregular Force. In conclusion, the British practiced choice recruitment based on ethno-religious lines, and the legacy can be seen in today's elite regiments of India and Britain.